record? Oh. It's like Michael Jackson. Suppositories of buttholes. Welcome back to my channel. I'm so cringe still, as you can see. If it's your first time, then hello. Today, we are going to be doing our very first Not Your Grandma's Bible study, where basically we go over scripture that your grandma would not recommend and probably wouldn't tell you about. So that being said, this is more of a mature content. So younger audiences maybe don't watch this, but also this is from the Bible, so do what you will with that. So the information I'm pulling from today concerning like the context of the history and just stuff that's happening in here is stuff I've researched on, and also I pull from Francine Rivers' book called Unveiled, and she's basically a fictional author who uses the cultural context to elaborate on stories of the Bible. So I'm not using like the words that she used or anything, but just for myself and putting in perspective of how things might have felt for these characters given the time period. I'll try to link her book. I don't know how to do that, but if you're interested in reading more, it was a great story. So let's get started. So we are going to be reading from Genesis chapter 38. And some context, so this is about Judah and Tamar. So Judah is going to be the dad in the situation. In the previous chapter, he was born into a family with a bunch of brothers, and he ended up selling his brother into slavery, with one of his brothers into slavery with his other brothers. So he's not the best guy right now. So that's just some context. And also Tamar, I will explain in a second, she's a Canaanite, which is seen as the wicked people just because of their customs, and oh, good to that. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking and just read it. So Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. So I read this, and I was like, oh, so God just strikes people down. Like, okay. But don't worry, this is the Old Testament. God doesn't do that anymore. So let's keep reading. So already that's kind of, Tamar's probably shook. She probably showed up, said like, yo, what's up? And then just her husband just dies. Like, I don't know. Anyways, so then Judah said to Onan, which is Er's brother, the second son. Then Judah said to Onan, sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. So context around this, that's not abnormal in that time. If you're married to someone, the like oldest brother, and they died, then you would sleep or marry the second brother, and then the first child you have would be to like honor your previous husband, and that child would inherit what the firstborn should be getting, and that's kind of how keeping his name alive and progressing the family tree, because that's what should have happened. So it's not abnormal. So he said, sleep with your brother's wife. But Onan knew that the child would not be his, basically taking his inheritance. So whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. Basically, moral of the story, if you spill your semen on the ground, God will strike you down. No, I'm just kidding. Anyways, I read this and I was like, when I first read this, they slept together, and then what happened? And I was like, wait a second, this is in the Bible? Like, my grandma never told me about this story in the Bible. A lot's happening. So this is crazy. And also that's significant because doing that also is very disrespectful to the wife, and it basically is treating her like a prostitute. So Tamar is then not only forced to marry the second brother, but then treated as a prostitute. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up. For he thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. Basically, at this point, the family is like, okay, obviously it's Tamar causing this because no one was being struck down until she got here. But I think in the back of Judah's head, he knew it was because of his actions with his brother. And that's kind of what like Francine Rivers alludes to also, that it was most likely because of that and not because like there's a Canaanite in the home, because the mother was also a Canaanite. So it wasn't kind of that. So it was basically because of Judah, and Judah was like reflecting his problems and just saying, okay, actually Tamar, like this is because of you, so you need to go. And sending her back to her father's household as a widow is basically a death sentence back then. Like her father could have easily had her stoned to death because it's seen as a failure to the family that you were promised to, and that like undoes the promises that those two families made, like in the arrangement, and is super disgraceful to the family. So she basically is being sent back not knowing if she was going to live. Let's keep going. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira the Adulamite went with him. When Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep," she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance of Iniam. Sorry if I butchered that. Which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. So she's sitting back, and this has been like probably 3-4 years now that she's just kind of sitting, waiting around, doing nothing until Judah's like, okay, come on. So after like 3 years, she hears that Judah's going to this festival, and she's like, okay, obviously he's not planning on giving me his third son because he is way old enough now to have a wife. Listen to what this girl does. So she took her widow's clothes off and put on a veil. That's what she did. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." "And what will you give me to sleep with you?" she asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," he said. "Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it?" she asked. He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Okay, that was a lot. She goes down to the road, right, and disguises herself, and then gets her father-in-law to sleep with her, and he thinks she's a prostitute because then she knows if she gets pregnant by him, that's her way back into the family. And she knows that he's on his way to the festival, so he's not going to have anything to give her, which is smart. She was a smart cookie. He was like, okay, so what am I going to pay you? What do you want? And she's like, oh no, it's no biggie. Just leave me something here and we'll trade it later. And he's like, okay, like what do you want? And she's like, oh, just your cord and seal, which basically is the equivalent to someone's driver's license and high school football ring. So he was like, okay, like that's fine. Like, what are you going to do with those two things, right? But also, those two things aren't that valuable, but they're very identifiable. So after she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend. Basically,
yada yada yada.
He's tried to send the goat back. His friend was like,
yo, there's no shrine prostitute here.
Side note, shrine prostitute. The Canaanites' religion, they had prostitutes at their temples, which is another kind of like why their practices were very frowned upon and they were seen as like the wicked people, is because they literally had prostitutes in their temples and said that was like how, I don't know, that's how they worshipped. Anyway, so they're like, oh, there's no shrine prostitute there, so that doesn't make sense. And he was like,
okay, I guess we just won't do anything. After all, I tried to give her a go, but we didn't find her.
About 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant. Judah said, bring her out and have her burned to death. Basically, so significance here, having her burned to death is very drastic. Because usually the punishment of prostitution was stoning to death back then, so having someone like sentenced to like burn to death was very like, you were mad. You were big. He was big mad. He was like,
okay, she's what now? She's a prostitute and she's pregnant? Oh, canceled. Tamar is canceled.
So, as she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. I am pregnant by the man who owns these, she said, and she added, See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are.
XOXO Gossip Girl.
Tamar is so petty. So what happens is his men run to Tamar, they go to her dad's house, and they're like, listen, Tamar, you've been canceled. Sorry. And she said,
oh, that's no big deal. Whatever. I have these things in this envelope. If you could just run these to Judah and ask if he knows who they are, and if he can return them to the baby daddy, so that the baby daddy just knows, like, we aren't going to make it home for dinner.
They take these things to Judah. Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her my son Sheila. Basically said, never mind, don't burn her. Bring her back. Like, it's okay, I'll take her back, because I kind of put her in that situation. So I just imagine Judah, like, opening up the thing and saying, like,
I know.
and just, like, completely, like, shutting him up. Like, seeing those things just kind of, like, very much convicted him. And that's where he was like, she is more righteous than I, because he knew he had, like, deceived her more and that he was more in the wrong than she was at this point. And he forced her into that. And so they're just like, oh, never mind. The craziest thing about this story, right, is that Jesus comes directly from this line. Like, she ends up having twins, and then from that, and Jesus comes from this from this. So, very significant story. And also it's a huge deal because Judah ended up, after this and being with Tamar, his heart got softened. He was really convicted and really changed, and then he got reconnected with his brother, who he sold, Joseph, and really just huge things happened because of that. That's just so interesting and wild. And then you just, like, wouldn't, like, this girl who got her husband struck down, and then she had to prostitute herself, and then just sleep with her father-in-law. Like, this is like Real Housewives of, I don't even know where we're at, like, Israel right now. A crazy story.
Where's my water? Like, did I bring it? I'm so far. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Right. Crazy thing about this. Okay, so the fact that Jesus was born from this is huge. And what that kind of means, like what that kind of tells us about God, is that God can use anyone in any situation. Tamar was a Canaanite. She didn't even believe in God when she, like, came into the family, and he still had huge plans for her. And Canaanites were, like, looked down upon and, like, the lowest of the low, and he used that lineage. So don't think you're disqualified from God using you because the stuff you did this weekend, or because of the choices you used to have to make, or because of whatever. Like, if you're a stripper or, like, a prostitute, like, don't think that God still can't use you, because it literally shows here how he did. There's proof, there's evidence. So don't come around and tell me, oh, God can't use me, or, oh, I'm too this to do something for God, or I'm too this to go to church. I'm not, like, this story just kind of proves that God literally can use anyone, any situation, any family story, because the family stories, like, don't think your family's too crazy to, like, ever get fixed, because Judah ended up coming to Jesus again, got reconciled, they had a great family life, and probably after years of it being crazy and hectic and up in the air, and God used it to advance his kingdom. So that's the first thing it teaches us about God, and what this teaches us about us, what this means for us. So if you look at this story from Tamar's perspective, she is in a stressful, hard situation throughout the entire story. First, she's thrown into a house that's not her natural beliefs or customs. Her first husband gets struck down. Her second husband treats her like a prostitute, then gets struck down. She's a widow, which is the lowest ranking of that time period. Then she had to make a choice to go sleep with Judah. That could have gone, he could have recognized her. That could have gone bad. She got pregnant. He sent to kill her. He could have decided to still kill her. And so that was a stressful situation, stressful call she made. And the easy thing for her to do would have just been to be okay with her situation and to just give up and accept the fact that Judah was never going to give the other son to her and just accept that she was going to be a widow. That would have been the easy thing. But instead, she did the hard thing and took action. And if she would have just given up, Jesus wouldn't have been here. Like, point blank. Like, if she would have just been okay with her situation, we would not have gotten our Savior. And what that means for us is, like, if you are experiencing a battle or struggle with something or a hard time or a hard week or a hard month where you just feel like life is just really coming for your neck and, like, you can't seem to get stuff right, you don't think you're going to pass a test, you don't think you can do this, the world's against you, this relationship you have is terrible, you don't think there's any hope for anything. If you give up on that and just, if you're okay with the world hitting you and just being okay with it, that's like the easy way out. You can't let the world just hit you around. And in our culture, we get so used to, like, just saying, like, oh, it'd be like that, like, oh, we all have to go through a hard time. If you get into this habit thinking things are too hard for you and things are stacked against you and the odds are stacked against you, it's going to eventually, like, snowball into where you think this world is just too hard to overcome. And we've all been in situations like that. But what this story teaches us is that when we feel that way, when we feel like we're in a situation that we're hopeless to or we can't, there's nothing we can do, there is something we can do. I'm not telling you to go out and, like, prostitute yourself, but there is something, like, in the struggle and situation you are in, there is something you can do to take action to try to change it. And it could be something little. It could be something so little as to just asking someone, hey, like what should I do? Or studying a little harder for the test, or taking 5 minutes to study, or if you're trying to get, like, more fit, like, go walk outside for 5 minutes. Like, there is something, I don't know, there's something you can do. If there's, like, a relationship you're struggling with, there is something you can do right now to put a small action towards changing that. And I know it's hard sometimes with, like, mental illnesses and certain situations where it's like, okay, that's easier said than done. And I'm not telling you right now to be like, oh, like, be happy. But just, like, try to put yourself in a better situation than you are now. Just try to set yourself up to help yourself a little bit. Because if you don't, you're just, like, saying that the situation that you're in has completely defeated you, and it hasn't. You're still here. You're still breathing. God can still change the situation. So don't just sit back and be okay with what's happening, and do something about it. Go get that bread. You can do it. Be like, think about Tamar and all, like, the anxiety and depression that she had to be going through. And by just taking a chance and taking an action, it completely changed the course of history. My challenge to you this week is, when you're in a hard and difficult, if you find yourself in a hard and difficult situation and you don't think there's anything you can do to change it, just think about this crazy story about Tamar and just think about how one action completely changed the outcome. And just take a chance on something little, something big. Just take a chance on an action to put yourself in a better position to overcome the struggle you're going through. And you can't do that alone. If you say, like,
oh, Katie, like, I'm self-made, I got it, like, I've always done things by myself, blah, blah, blah.
No, you haven't. Show me the receipts, because we've all, to get to the better things in life, to do the greater things in life, to be where we're at, we've all needed someone. We've all relied to someone. This idea of being self-made and self-dependent is a bunch of horsepucky that just puts us in a very, that's a whole nother Bible study. But just, I encourage you to lean on Jesus when you're doing this and just kind of trust him and just say, hey, Jesus, like, I'm taking this little action. Please produce, like, some fruit from it. Just show me what the next action should be, and change the situation. And I promise you, you will be amazed at the outcomes.
So yeah.
That's it. Again, this was reading from Genesis chapter 38, and then the book was Francine Rivers Unveiled. If you have any questions for me about Tamar or Judah or anything about Jesus or college or what else do I know about, or different types of ramen, know a lot about that, please reach out. I'll answer your questions next week. Thanks for tuning in. See ya on the flippity flop. And remember,
Cringe.
remember that only dead fish go with the flow. Bye.
Have a great week.